Sylvia Snowden, and I am the host of CAN-TV's Political Forum. And CAN-TV is very proud to be the media sponsor of this afternoon's debate. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is we know so far, just kind of set this up for everybody. So, because we do not yet know who the next mayor of Chicago will be, but we do know that it will not be a woman. Now, that's not necessarily the end of the world. In Chicago's 186-year history, we've only had 2 women serve as mayors, so we've made it without a ton of women mayors, but I think it is important to women to know that the next mayor of Chicago cares about women's issues. Now, of course, as women, we are concerned about public safety, but as we know, it takes more than just public safety to run a city like Chicago. So what we have this afternoon are 2 very fabulous moderators. We have 2 very fascinating candidates, and we have a lot of information that we need to cover, right? So at this time, I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to introduce Jackie Algie from the Chicago Women Take Action Alliance. I'm going to wish you all a fantastic debate. Thank you so much, and I'll be back.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good afternoon. Come on, let's try that one more time. Good afternoon. Okay, I have been charged with welcoming you to this forum. Now, if you remember, for those, let me see a show of hands of how many of you were here in January when we had a forum. Whoa, yeah, good deal. And we left here, right, expecting that we'd be back here today, didn't we? Didn't most of you think we'd be back here today? We didn't know who, but we knew it probably would be. So we are so glad, so happy and delighted that you are here, and you care enough about the issues that concern not only women but their families and communities, and you care enough to be here so that you can make an informed decision if you haven't already, right? Yes. Who said yes? Okay. And so we want to do a little, rule setting, if you would. No clapping or yelling and giving hurrahs to the candidates that either you support or you are impressed with what they say. In turn, no jeering, no boos and all that. We're going to be very civil with our conduct of this forum today, okay? Wait a minute, let's try that again. Okay? All right. Okay. So, again, welcome on behalf of Chicago Women Take Action Alliance. There are over 45 groups that are a part of the alliance that we have formed, and we are just excited about continuing to bring what is important conversation to the women and people of Chicago. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask my sister Mary Driscoll to come up, and she's got some more information for you. Thank you.
Hey, I'm going to good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to do a little housekeeping. Just to remind everybody that if you want to stream it later, or if you have anybody at home that might want to stream it now, you can go to the cwtalliance.org page, and the link for streaming with CAN-TV will be there. I also want to tell people that we're going to have a brief question and answer period after the main part of the forum is over. So you should have gotten index cards on your way in. Use those index cards to write questions. If you have a question, raise them up, and someone will come by and collect it. We're going to stop taking the index cards about 3:25, so we can sort them out for the moderators. If you didn't get an index card and you have a question, you can raise your hand. Someone will come and give you a card. Okay, so now I want to introduce the 2 dynamic women that are our moderators. Okay. We have one more announcement, I've been told, so hang on.
All right, we're going to have Gabby to come up and tell you what she's available to do should you need.
Hello, everybody. a day of announcements, good announcements. Buenas tardes. I'm going to make an announcement in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Soy Gabriela y está mi compañera Carmina. Hoy vamos a tener acceso de lenguaje para aquellos que prefieren un lenguaje diferente, que prefieren escuchar en español. Tenemos interpretación hoy, tenemos micrófonos, tenemos equipo en la parte de atrás, así que por favor no se cohiban, tenemos muchísimos si ustedes prefieren escuchar en español. Por favor, déjenos saber y con mucho gusto le damos equipo. What I said, if anybody would like to hear in Spanish, that's the language that is in their heart and their preference is to hear in Spanish. We have plenty of equipment for anyone who would like to listen in Spanish. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy.
Okay, important announcement. So now I'm going to the moderators. Again, we have two great dynamic women that have agreed to be our moderators, Cheryl Corley and Joan Esposito. Let me make a brief introduction of both of them. So Cheryl Corley is a correspondent and acting Midwest Bureau Chief for National Public Radio. For more than 2 decades, she's covered some of the country's most important news stories for NPR, working as Midwest and criminal justice correspondent. She now curates and edits stories from reporters working at public radio stations throughout the Midwest. Prior to joining NPR, Cheryl was the news director at WBEZ. And as a City Hall reporter there, she covered the administration of several mayors, beginning with the administration of Harold Washington. Joan Esposito, our other moderator, explores Chicago area neighborhoods and talks politics, issues, and culture as the afternoon host of a political show on a progressive radio station, WCTP-AM. An Emmy Award winner journalist, Esposito has been a reporter and news anchor for ABC, Channel 7, NBC 5, and WGN Channel 9. I want to welcome them both with gratitude on behalf of the Chicago Women Take Action Alliance. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And welcome to our Women's Mayoral Forum, sponsored, as you know, by the Women Take Action Alliance. I am Cheryl Corley.
I am Joan Esposito. During the next 2 hours, we are going to really explore some of the challenges facing the next mayor of the city of Chicago. Many of those critical issues disproportionately affect women.
And thanks to everyone who is in our audience today and to everyone watching at home, thanks to CAN TV and to Facebook Live. And we are going to begin with some of the ground rules too. Our forum is not a formal debate.
Each candidate will give an opening statement. There will be no closing statements. And we ask each candidate to please respond directly to the question.
There is a time limit of 2 minutes for each answer, expansive in these days of debate and forums. Our timer, Tanya, over there, has a loud buzzer to keep you on track, so please keep your answers direct and on point and to time, and that's going to help us all.
And just want to repeat to the audience, we're trying to get through a lot of material, and when there's audience reaction, it really slows us down. So please, because we want to get to as much information as possible, don't react, don't applaud, don't boo, and remember to silence your cell phones if you haven't done it already.
Yes. The goal here is for voters to be able to gather the information they need, as Joan has said, in order for you to make an informed decision in this election. So we are going to begin, but first let's welcome our candidates. And let's hear first opening statement from Brandon Johnson.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very humbled and honored to be in this particular moment where the movement that has propelled us into one of the most dynamic moments in the city's history. So over the course of the last several months, I've had the opportunity to travel all over the city, speaking directly to the people of Chicago to build a better, stronger, safer one. I believe we can do that together. You know, for too long, the politics of old that have allowed for families to be left behind. For too long, the politics of old have pitted communities against one another. but I'm running for the city of Chicago because the city of Chicago deserves a leader who loves people. You know, the best job that I've ever had is that of a public school teacher, and I've looked in the faces of young people who have felt hopeless and lost. And that's why the best thing that we can do as a city is to have a leader that is prepared to invest in people. Whether it's public education, public transportation, safer communities, access to health care and environmental justice, we can have a better, stronger, safer city, and we can do it together. I'll close with this. My wife and I are raising our family on the west side of the city of Chicago. We love raising our family in Austin, but it has been a community that has been disinvested in for too long. And as a result of that, it is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the entire city. I have tremendous incentive for the city of Chicago to be better, stronger, and safer. But we have to do what safe American cities do all over the country, and that's invest in people. We have a clear choice here. We can rely upon the politics of old that have caused tremendous disruption and despair and hopelessness, or we can build something better and brighter. I'm very humbled to be here today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Now let's hear a 2-minute opening statement from Paul Vallas.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be in this great house, and of course, congratulations, recognition of International Women's Day last Wednesday. It's nice to be here a second time during the campaign season, a unique experience for me. The city's in crisis. Every single problem that the city faces today, whether it's a degraded, demoralized police department that has failed to implement the consent decree, whether it's schools that families are pulling their children out of in record number, or for that matter, whether it's these massive budgets that they pass every year that are not really equitable or affordable documents, it's all a product of poor leadership on the fifth floor. What we're offering, what I've been offering, is quality leadership, and not the type of leadership that is a solo act, but rather a leader who can bring people together, a leader who can draw people from the community, who can build a coalition, who can bring people into all levels of government, who have the skills, who have the stamina, who have the incentive, and who have the track record to get the city back on track. Every single crisis, every single public service challenge I have faced has been by invitation, whether it was addressing the city's financial crisis in the 90s or taking over the schools when they were at once called the worst school system in the country, and President Clinton then 2 years later after my tenure called them a national model, or whether it was going to other cities like Philadelphia or rebuilding the entire school system in New Orleans from the ground up after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. My success was not a solo effort. My success was recognizing that the real leaders are within the community. And unless you empower the community and you bring the community together and you draw from the community the type of leadership that you need to get things back on track, you're not going to be a success. That's the type of leadership I've demonstrated wherever I have been privileged with the opportunity to serve, and that's the type of leadership that I will demonstrate when I'm mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have broken our questions into specific areas, and since you both do have significant ties to education, that's where we're going to begin and have you both address the same question. The quality of education in Chicago neighborhoods is very uneven. So what would you do to increase the quality and the accessibility of public education in all of Chicago? Mr. Vallas?
Well, let me point out that the first order of business is really to decentralize the district so the money follows the students to the local schools. Only 60% of the $30,000 we spend per pupil actually finds its way into the local schools. So we've got to push the money down where the principals and the local school councils are making the primary decisions on what their needs are. Secondly, we've got to restore the concept of community-based schools where the campuses are open through the dinner hour, through the weekends, over the holidays, in the summer, and invite community-based organizations and invite the faith-based organizations, park districts, to bring their programs. So not only are we providing the additional supports that are needed at the local school level, but we're also ensuring that all young people are in a safe and secure place. The third thing we have to do is we have to move in the direction of providing universal work study. There's no reason why every city agency, every single department, every contractor, the labor unions can all create paid work-study jobs for our young people. So we're engaging all of them, whatever school they come from, whatever community they live, we're connecting them directly to the workforce, and we're putting them in a safe, secure environment where they're surrounded by the best role models in the community, working men and women. And finally, we have got to face the reality that there are tens and tens of thousands of young people out there, 18 to 25, that are either not in school or they do not have a job. So we need to reopen these closed schools as alternative schools and adult and occupational training programs in every community, because there are both federal and state funding available to do just such programs, but yet the city has squandered the opportunity to do so. So those are things that I have done before, and those are things that I will do and bring to scale when I become mayor.
Mr. Johnson, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. As an organizer, I fought to shift the dynamics in Springfield to create a new funding formula so that the school district is based, in terms of funding, is based on the need and not per pupil. We actually have that model, but Chicago Public Schools has not embraced it. Under my administration, we will embrace the needs-based budgeting, which could give us up to $1 billion of additional investment. Now, my philosophy in terms as it relates to public education is actually very clear. It's not that much different than W.E.B. Du Bois, when he said that public education at the expense of the state, after all, is a Negro idea. You're actually going to have a mayor who believes in public education. As a product of the public school system, of someone who sends their children to the public schools here in Chicago, I have tremendous incentive for the schools to actually work. And so what does that look like? We expand the sustainable community schools model, which we implemented the last go-around when the schools were closed under the previous administration that caused tremendous disruption. We created an alternative model to that type of privatization and school disruption. Sustainable community schools is a unique model that provides a baseline of support for all of our schools throughout the city, but additional resources so that the unique needs to various communities throughout the city of Chicago are actually satisfied. Here's a second thing that we have to do. We need to make sure that we are closing the gap between education or graduation and job opportunities. That's why I've worked hard as an organizer to bring the trades into the schools. CPS has rejected those opportunities. I'm going to expand those opportunities. There are 55,000 vacancies right now in manufacturing positions alone, where the average salary is $80,000. These are economic drivers that can ultimately sustain communities. Here's a final thing that we have to do. We need to prepare for an elected representative school board. It's something that I fought for. Democracy in the hands of the people of the city of Chicago is one of the best transformational things that we've done.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to stay on the topic of education. Critics believe that school vouchers take resources that public schools need. What sort of limits, if any, do you think are needed when it comes to vouchers? Mr. Vallas?
Well, I support the scholarship program, which incidentally the governor supports also, and an expansion of the scholarship program, because the scholarship program is designed to really get the corporate community to provide investments and to obviously receive tax credits in order to incentivize that. So I've always been supportive of that. But I also think that right now the Chicago Public Schools has, they have 126 charter schools. I think those are enough charters. We opened 15 charter schools when we ran the Chicago Public Schools because we were very cautious about not destabilizing communities by converting schools to charter schools. That happened later on this future superintendents. But I think it's really important that we expand quality public school choice. And this is the way we did it in the 90s when the enrollment grew by almost 40,000. First of all, we expanded the number of magnet high schools. And look, there's only 7 magnet high schools of the 126 high schools. But more importantly, we put magnet high schools in neighborhood programs like the IB programs, the World Language Academy programs, the Advanced Math and Science Academy programs, the Military Academy and First Responder programs. So by dramatically expanding traditional public school choice and allowing students the option of actually enrolling in those community-based magnet programs, we transformed a huge number of high schools, and we actually, after 15 years of declining enrollment, actually dramatically improved the enrollment. So my priority would be focused on expanding traditional public school choice. And at the end of the day, you know, supporting more corporate investments in the scholarship program would certainly be something that I would continue to support.
Mr. Johnson, you have 2 minutes.
I believe the people of Chicago are sick and tired of the experimentation on black and brown and poor children when it comes to education. When you look at some of the most economically stable neighborhoods throughout the country, children do not have to apply for something that is free. When we think about the history of vouchers in this country, y'all do know the history, right? Right? It was designed because there was an entire segment of the population that did not want to have to participate in the public space with black and brown and poor people. Why do we continue to implement the politics of old that continue to cause us to be stratified? You can't say that you're trying to bring the city together when you continue to move policies that separate people. We are setting up winners and losers. Public education shouldn't be doing that. And under my administration, we're going to fully invest in publicly funded neighborhood schools. It's not a radical concept. It actually works around the country. As far as corporate participation, they could pay their fair share in taxes. We could start there, right? Instead of raising property taxes on working people, and then the same people that you tax, our children have to apply for the very tax investments that we are providing to the school district. So we pay the property taxes, and then there's no guarantee that we will have access to the public good. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? That this is a very, very basic concept here. And so this is a matter of having priorities. There's enough for everyone. As mayor of the city of Chicago, no one should lose at the expense of someone else winning. Picking people out here and there, giving people opportunity while you leave people behind, not under my administration. I fully support publicly funded neighborhood schools.
One last question on education. In recent years, and you've both noted, there's been turmoil in the school system with school closures, school strikes. There will soon be an elected school board. But next year, as mayor, one of you will appoint half of the board. So how will you involve the community in that process? Mr. Vallas.
Well, first of all, by empowering the community, and the way you empower the community is you actually go out to the community and you solicit candidates from the community. So that's how you involve them in the process. Look, I'm not intimidated by them. I've worked under elected school boards, appointed school boards, governor-appointed school boards, mayor-appointed school boards, state takeovers. I've never had the choice. In other words, I've had to deal with what I've had to deal with. But at the end of the day, I think the elected school board is another way to involve and engage the community in the governance of schools. I've always been a strong supporter of individual local school councils. That's why I want to push the funding down to the local school level. I mean, why do we even need a macro citywide council to make all the decisions that should be made at the local level? We have locally elected school councils. We've never really empowered them. I empowered them, but I literally empowered them to to select virtually all of their principals. So at the end of the day, we have local school councils and we need to push the money down. So I support the elected school board. I will work with the elected school board. We'll engage the elected school board, but we will also strengthen the local school councils and the local principals, and we will push the money down to the local level. Those are the things that we did when we ran the schools, and enrollment grew by 40,000, and we did it in full partnership with the teachers union. After 8 strikes in 15 years, we had 8 years of labor peace. We increased teachers' salaries, a compounded 27%. We never had to close a single school. That is the approach that I've taken in the past. So I welcome the citywide school council. I will consult the community to determine who I will appoint, and at the end of the day, though, I will work overtime to push the money down to the local schools and the local communities and their locally elected school councils and their locally selected principals.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
I am so relieved that mayoral control is coming to an end. It has been an absolute disaster, Chicago. Do you know there are 1,000 children that are black that are missing from the school closings in 2013? Hear me. We have no account for 1,000 black children. No one knows where they are. 223 of them were my neighbors on the west side of Chicago. School closings has not just been turmoil. It's been one of the most horrific acts ever done against a group of people in the history of the city of Chicago. And there's been some bad stuff here, y'all. And so that's why, of course, the community process that has propelled my candidacy into this fireable state that we're in right now. We've caught tremendous fire to make sure that we are representing the interests of the people of Chicago. And so we're going to take it directly to the people to make recommendations. But also when it comes to local school councils, and this is the difference between, Paul and myself. Probationary schools were set up under his reign. So though local school councils had jurisdiction, they were also set up to ultimately lead to closings because we set up a standard where schools were put on probation. Those are terms that are used when it comes to the criminalization of people.
Mr. Johnson, but how would you involve the community?
I've said it, I'm gonna take it right to the community. We're gonna do that. What I'm saying though is, if we're gonna have a better school system, we have to recognize how it has failed. Because the people of Chicago haven't failed. The children are not failures. The system has been set up to harm children. We're going to eliminate that harm. Taking it directly to the people is what I've always done as an organizer, and I'll do that as mayor of the city of Chicago.
Mr. Vallas, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, first of all, I'm surprised that I don't get blamed for the sinking of the Lusitania. Let me point out that we put 8 schools on probation back in 1995, incidentally with the support of the Chicago Teachers Union. And we reconstituted those schools, and all those schools are opening and functioning today. And one of those schools was King Magnet, because King had lost 80% of its enrollment, and now it's a thriving, dynamic school. 8 of the 553 schools. So don't even associate me with Rahm Emanuel, or for that matter, the Renaissance 2010 with Arnie Duncan. The bottom line is we moved very cautiously. It was the same thing on charter schools, despite the fact that the Chicago Teachers Union supported charter schools. Schenker came from Washington to talk to us about charter schools because he was the longtime president of the American Federation of Teachers. So sorry about that. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
We are going to be switching areas now, but this is an area that you've addressed, both of you, previously, but we're going to look at this through the lens of women issues, policing, crime, public safety. Since 2019, a court order calls for the Chicago Police Department to reform how it works. That order came in the aftermath of a white officer fatally shooting a black teenager. The consent decree aims in part to change the police department's culture. It's believed by many that one way to do that is to hire more women. There's a national campaign to boost the number of female police recruits. How would your administration work to increase women on the force? Mr. Johnson, we'll start with you, 2 minutes.
Well, in my public safety plan, I lay out how we are going to invest, spend, to make sure that we are implementing the consent decree with all due expediency. And we have estimated conservatively $50 million to do that. One of the things that I think is important as I get to how we recruit and retain women in particular is that a part of the consent decree is to make sure that our research institutions are fully funded to actually develop the policies that will ultimately guide how we reform the system, right? And so as you talk about recruiting and retaining women in particular, it is very difficult to ask women to serve, do the job, and someone else's at the same time. We're asking too much from police officers. How do we say that we're supporting police officers, but we're asking them to serve and protect? They have to be social workers, they have to be camp counselors, they have to be marriage counselors. That's what's happening every single day. 40% of the 911 calls that come through are mental health crises. And so the best way we can recruit and retain women in law enforcement is actually create a working environment that's favorable towards women. And that's in every single industry, right? That's in every sector. But unfortunately, we have relied so heavily on law enforcement to do and handle every single dynamic, much like we do with teachers, and that's why we're having a tough time recruiting and retaining educators as well. We have to improve the conditions in which individuals are being asked to serve. As mayor of the city of Chicago, I'm going to tell you the truth. We're going to create better environments so that law enforcement can do their job and not someone else's.
Mr. Vallas.
All right, so let me respond to your specific question. But first, let me preface my remarks to say that the consent decree has to be the floor, not the ceiling. And a couple of the biggest flaws in the consent decree, besides the fact that it's not being implemented effectively, is the fact that you still have the friends and family promotion system that promote people who do not have the time and grade and experience and records of accomplishment into the exempt leadership positions, and that is a big flaw. The second flaw is the supervisory ratios. You still have one sergeant for what, every 30 police officers? On the west side, on some nights, they have one sergeant for the entire 11th district. Imagine that. And only half the cars to respond to 911 calls, 406,000 911 calls, a couple years ago were not responded to high priority because there was not a car available, so it took them hours to respond. We are still 1,700 police officers down from where we were in 2019. So don't think without filling those vacancies, at least the vacancies, that we're not going to be able to restore public safety to communities that have really never had it. But the way you recruit in a diversified way is a real simple way. We have 10,000 young people in ROTC programs. I opened 7 military and first responder high schools in Chicago. And there are, I think, 40 high schools with ROTC programs. And 46% of those 10,000 students are women. We can provide a direct pipeline from the ROTC programs, from the first responders programs, from the police and fire academy clubs that were created when Terry Hilliard was superintendent and Ray Roscoe and myself back in the 90s. There's absolutely no way we can create a pipeline for not only police officers drawn from the community, and that includes drawing women into the police department, but the fire department, nursing, EMS, EMTs, avionics. The pipeline is right there. We've got to, and I think Brandon and I both agree, the schools have got to get into the game. The school leadership has got to get into the game.
Thank you. The Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline saw a big jump in calls last year, more than 36,000 according to the network. That's an agency that advocates against domestic violence. In the Chicago region, one of the big problems that callers faced was a lack of available beds and cribs and emergency shelters. So what steps would you take as a mayor to address that shortage? Mr. Johnson, let's begin with you.
So, I've seen this in the classroom with the amount of students who are unhoused. 87% of students, particularly black students especially, are in women-headed households. And in many instances, I've experienced this where that type of trauma goes untreated. And so we first have to recognize that within our public school system, we have to create more space for trauma-related services, right? As far as what is happening at the county level, we have shifted our resources to ensure that those individuals who are in a domestic violence situation have 24-hour support. We did that on the county board. As mayor of the city of Chicago, this is a matter of investment in resources. And so being creative with the vacancy that we have in the city of Chicago, whether it's shuttered schools or, again, building more affordable housing, expanding support for facilities that deal with families who are in this particular dynamic. It's a very harsh circumstance. My parents were foster parents, so I've lived this growing up, seeing families suffer from domestic violence. And so it is a matter of priority and investment, but we have to create more spaces more physical spaces, but also more spaces where the treatment that is needed to help women in particular get the job training that they need, the type of independence that they're going to need to ensure a healthy, safer environment. Our schools have to participate in it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Vallas, steps you would take to
Yeah, let me
address-
look at this holistically. First of all, I think we need a commission on women's health and safety, and there needs to be a deputy mayor that chairs that commission. I also think we need to appoint an assistant superintendent of police that focuses on domestic violence, because here's a statistic for you, and I wrote it down on my way here. 151,000 domestic violence calls last year. How many responded to? 10%? Think about that. Ponder that. 75,000 outstanding warrants out there. Outstanding warrants, most of them domestic violence. There is no response. And when there is a response, there is no follow-up. So way too often, because we're not providing shelters, we have 151 or 152 available beds. I was told last week when I was talking to a group about this very same issue. 152 beds, they get 200 calls a night. Those are the calls that they're like responding to, where they have actually made a call and they're looking for a bed. We have 15,000, something's like upwards to 15,000 vacant residential properties around the city. I mean, the city should seize those properties through eminent domain or tax sales. They should get the CHA into the game because they have thousands of CHA units that are vacant. They should inventory and make those buildings available, because it's not just domestic violence, it's also child trafficking. We all know what's happening, and it's an epidemic. But it's not only a resource issue, it's also a priority issue. So you put somebody in the deputy mayor spot that focuses on this issue exclusively. You create a deputy superintendent that focuses specifically on domestic violence. You bring retired detectives out of retirement to come in to supplement the detectives' ranks so that they can focus on witness and victim protection, so they can make those follow-up calls when there has been a domestic violence call. So that individual who is abusing will know that that house is going to be visited again. My oldest son was a police... Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Vallas. We are going to switch areas. If we have time, we'll revisit this one, but we want to make sure we hit all of the major areas we have planned. So let's talk about economic growth and jobs, again, through the lens of women's issues. Childcare can often be a crucial component of whether or not a woman can participate in the workforce. It can be expensive, and in some areas of the city, even finding daycare can be difficult. It can often lead to women passing up job opportunities, switching jobs, or quitting work altogether. How would you create more daycare options and get rid of childcare deserts in the city? Mr. Johnson, you want to take that?
You know, the childcare structure right now is unaffordable, unavailable, and unsustainable. So that's why in my education plan, I'm calling for childcare for all, right? Because it has to be a public good. Well, when my wife and I needed childcare, we were spending $1,500 a month on childcare, which was more than our mortgage. And ours was considerably relatively affordable. But now I believe it's 58 to 60% of most families do not have access to reliable, affordable childcare. And many of the childcare workers in particular, especially the childcare centers, these individuals are making $4 an hour, right? And to your point, many of them can't even send their own children for childcare services. And this is why, in my plan, we're collaborating with the state of Illinois to make sure that the funding and the resources are available to make childcare a public good. Childcare for every single person. You know, what's increasingly becoming more obvious is that the industries where black and brown women are at the forefront, the government seems to never have enough, right? And so the pay, the accessibility, the collaboration, and the guarantee, that is what I'm going to do as the mayor of the city of Chicago. And I know what those facilities need because I started off as a child care worker. Children's World Learning Center, one of the most incredible experiences of my life. When you don't have spaces where families can actually drop their children off for care, that's affordable and reliable, that's a problem right? And so that's why the type of collaboration that I've done as an organizer, I'm going to do that as mayor of the city of Chicago, and I'm glad to actually have the support of child care workers. It's why they trust me, because we're going to get it done.
Mr. Vallas, 2 minutes.
Well, you know, if you push the money down to the local schools and you empower the local principals and the community councils to, or the local school councils to make those decisions, you're going to have more child care, particularly if you allow the community providers and you prioritize allowing the community providers who have been discriminated against, who have been underfunded, who have been denied funded despite promises, if you allow them to use the schools to open their child care centers in the schools. Look at how many schools are underpopulated. Look at how many schools have additional space. We have 650 schools. There's no reason why, through a partnership with CPS and community providers, you can't dramatically increase child care services. Also, you need to give child care providers, community-based child care providers, because it's not only a universal child care, it's also an industry. It's also a local economy. So if you provide those providers with capital support that are generally provided to other providers, particularly when schools are building out their facilities to accommodate local child care services, and if you also provide them with tax-exempt status, so they're not burdened with property taxes and other fees and costs, you can dramatically create a robust child care program across the system. But the system, the schools, the 650 schools have got to get into the game. I also want to say one other thing. You will not close the achievement gap without universal prenatal to 3. Prenatal to 3. And we had a program that served 2,500 pregnant teens who we identified. We got into prenatal care. We provided them with a coach. And that coach worked with them until the kids entered kindergarten. There was no achievement gap at 3rd grade. The teen pregnancy rate had plummeted, and the teen mothers had an 80% graduation rate. So that's my solution. That's my approach, and it is achievable. It's a question of prioritizing.
Thank you very much. Many publicly funded construction projects in the city are subject to federal hiring goals for women and for minorities. However, the steps construction contractors must take to diversify their workforce are rarely monitored, and hiring goals are rarely enforced. So what would your administration do to enforce those standards and ensure that high-paying construction jobs on public projects are available to women? Mr. Vallas, why don't we begin with you?
All right, very good. Let me tell you what I did. When Gary Chico and I took responsibility for the Chicago Public Schools, we figured out a way to finance and implement a $3.2 billion school construction program that built 78 buildings and renovated 350. I set 3 goals: 50% minority hiring, companies, contracts, 50% minority hiring, and 50% local residents. We exceeded those goals. $1.7 billion in contracts went to Black and Latino-owned companies, and let me point out that I believe it was 32 or 34% were Black male-owned companies, because we didn't double count. 58% of those employees, 1.78 billion, were Black and Latino and women workers. That's how we set those goals. We implemented those goals. You know how we were able to get the companies in the game? We insured them. We provided them with bonding. We provided them with startup capital. And you know how we got the labor unions to allow those companies to hire their own employees? We did the first comprehensive project labor agreement with the labor unions. So they were able to hire their own employees. We were spending $600 million a year just on school construction. That model works. That model can be applied to the much larger budget, the $28 billion that the city has under its control. And it wasn't just construction. We targeted 40% of our professional service contracts, and we did target marketing exclusively to Black companies, small technology companies. That can be done if there's a will. That can be done if you bring people like Natalie Pekin and Perry Ermer and Rusty Castillo, the individuals, and Marilyn Johnson, the late Marilyn Johnson, to drive those reforms. So you set the goals, you create the infrastructure, and then you bring people who really believe in that, and that can be accomplished. You can go to my website and you can look at the 78 schools. Type in your address, and it'll show a school that I built in your community.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I don't know when we've ever actually experienced any of the things that Paul Vallas is talking about. I mean, just the economy in which we live in right now just doesn't reflect that. In fact, we have a $2.5 billion tax bill because of the budgetary schemes of the 1990s. And so that's why unemployment rate is, particularly in the black community, in the brown community, it's Great Depression era numbers, right? During the Great Depression, unemployment for white men was 30%. Our country called it a national crisis. They gave white men shovels before there were things to dig. The way we actually do it in the city of Chicago is that we set the priority, right? We also make sure that we're investing in our public school system so that we are preparing and training the workforce to experience the type of economic opportunities that exist. The challenge that we have right now, it's not a matter of, the projects. Of course we set the goals. And as mayor of the city of Chicago, I'm going to ensure that those goals are met. We also have to make sure that we're investing on the front end to prepare the workforce to actually be able to do the work. Because it's not just about the contracts, it's about the people that they're going to hire. And right now, we do not have a commitment in our public education system that includes all the way up to our community colleges to build and prepare individuals for those opportunities. It's a both-and approach. And right now, we have had, for too long, this stratified approach that have left people behind. In my administration, we're going to look girls in the face, and we're going to tell them that they can actually be electricians, they can be plumbers, they can be pipe fitters, they can be general contractors. But that requires a real comprehensive approach, but you also have to have a budget that speaks to that. It's why I released the budget plan. All of this requires investment. There is nothing coming from Paul that speaks to how we're going to generate the revenue to actually get the investment to get these contracts on the books, as well as the workforce prepared to do the work. You can't put the cart before the horse. And you certainly can't rely upon the budgetary schemes that put us in the economic despair right now as a model of how we're going to make sure that black and brown and women actually experience the largesse of this economy.
Well, let's continue on that vein. You guys both filled out the Chicago Women Take Action Alliance survey. You both said you would take full advantage of the Illinois Clean Energy Jobs Act, those resources, bring them to Chicago. Oh, that's great. How are you going to ensure that those jobs are fairly inclusive of women and black and brown community members? Mr. Vallas, you want to start?
Yeah, well, first of all, following the same formula that we followed when we allocated 55% of the contracts to minority businesses and 58% of the hiring. That's a fact. That's just a fact. Look at any of the schools. You can go through the list, go on my website, look at the schools, look at the arguments. And I just have to point out that I left the city with a structurally balanced budget and a record number of police officers. And then the schools, we left the schools with $1 billion cash balances and 13 bond rating upgrades and a 100% funded pension system. The rating agencies don't give you bond rating upgrades if you're mortgaging the future. But the bottom line here is you set goals and you implement them, just as I did when I ran the Chicago Public Schools, just as I did when we were awarding professional service contracts. I'll also tell you this, if we're going to get at the issue of climate change, and look, raising taxes by taxing, by imposing taxes on the hotel motel scene, by imposing taxes on the hotel motel scene, by imposing taxes on the hotel motel scene that's already been devastated. Taxing jet fuel, if you want to scatter the airlines to other airports, you tax jet fuel at 7, 8, 9%. Last time I looked, working people occasionally, middle-income people occasionally have to also take flights to other places too. I mean, the tax package, if it even passed, will not generate a fraction of the revenue. So I'm talking about reprogramming $28 billion in spending at the American Controls. I'm talking about tapping into the TIF surpluses that have totaled $1 billion the last 3 years. I'm talking about taking that $1.1 billion TIF diversion and taking advantage of that money to provide fair share allocation of resources, or even bonding on future TIF revenues that will be freed up when the tax increment financing districts expire. I'm talking about real solutions.
Mr. Johnson.
Dyett High School in the south side of Chicago is set to close. Again, it was a school that was put on probation and was disinvested in. Again, a probationary program that was started and implemented, and I'm grateful that Paul admitted that he started the probationary dynamic that was continued, and it put a school like Dyett on the chopping block. Now, I was a part of the hunger strike to keep the school open, and part of the premise of the school was for green technology in particular. This is an incredible opportunity for us, but one of the first things that we have to do is do a full cumulative impact study so that we have a complete analysis of the environment in which we are living in. Because environmental justice and climate justice is important, right? But it is a part of the new economic infrastructure that this country is going to rely upon. So whether it's biotech, life sciences, the green technology, particular in urban farms, all of the different things that we can do to retrofit our buildings, to make sure that we are getting lead out of the pipes, all of the opportunities that we have through shifting our economy through a more green infrastructure will ultimately lead towards economic security, because the jobs that will come from that require someone who believes in public education to make sure that those opportunities are available for our young people, starting as early as 4th and 5th grade, to begin to have work experiences that will lead to the type of opportunities that will be available. The bottom line is this: if you want a safe city, you do what safe American cities do around this country, and you invest in people. And a teacher and a firefighter should not pay the same tax rate as a millionaire or a billionaire. That is the premise of the Democratic Party. No wonder why I agree with it, and my opponent does not.
Well, thank you for answering the tax questions we were going to present to you ahead of time. So we'll go there. But let's talk about health care for just a moment. How would you use the power of the mayor to work on reproductive justice issues, such as reducing disparities in maternal morbidity and mortality, especially for African American women? Mr. Johnson, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. So I believe in a woman's right to have an abortion. I believe in reproductive health care. Was raised by women. I'm married to one. She's lovely. 25th wedding anniversary in June. Let you know this will be a big party when I'm mayor. I'm raising a daughter. And to know that we are living in a society where what my mother and my mother-in-law fought for, that my daughter and my wife have to fight to keep it. We are a sanctuary place. There's no equivocation here. Collaborating with Cook County government, that's one of the first things that we get to do, to create more health care opportunities for women, black women in particular, to access. Look, it's well stated and documented that when black women in particular express pain, doctors do not believe them. And so one of my responsibilities as a man is to get off the sideline and encourage other men to get off the sideline, to be advocates on behalf of our women. And I would do that as mayor of the city of Chicago. Protecting women, it is my honor to do that. Lifting up the work of women, that's my honor to do that. And so this is why on the county board, we passed a budget to eliminate medical debt. We passed a budget so that universal basic guaranteed income is available, so that women have the ability to have access to actually have treatment and services. But we also have to make sure that we are providing full services and making sure that the bubble districts are protected, making sure that corporations are participating, like Walgreens, to making sure that that all of the services that need to be available to protect the health care of women, I would do that and lead that as mayor of the city of Chicago. Thank you.
Mr. Vallas.
So I, as mayor, will do what I've always done, and that's support, with no hesitation, with no constraints, a woman's reproductive rights. And Chicago will not only be a safe haven for women who live in the city and women who live in the state, but it will be a safe haven for anyone who comes to Chicago seeking the protection of those rights. I think what we have to do on a much broader healthcare scale is we've got to, just as we need to reopen the mental health clinics that were closed, and just as every single district that the police district serves needs to have a mental health center, we need to restore and expand community-based mental health centers that can provide for these critical needs, whether it's the reproductive rights of women, or for that matter, whether it's other health care issues that women need addressed. You need to rebuild the community-based social service infrastructure. And that's why I've talked about things like creating an investment fund in the community where you can earmark casino revenues, and you can earmark gaming revenues and cannabis revenues, where you can earmark and do a fair share of TIF revenues, not only to make infrastructure investments or capital investments in businesses and in economic development initiatives, but you can begin to restore the community-based social services. In my administration, there will be a direct and continuing appropriation to provide for the medical care of women who are in need, whether they are women in Chicago, whether they are women who are coming to Chicago seeking to exercise their reproductive rights, whether they are immigrants coming to Chicago. At the end of the day, we will make sure that the funding is there to provide the financial support for any individual, any family seeking the services that they are entitled to and the services that they are being denied elsewhere. That will be a guarantee.
Again, thank you, panelists, for being so eager to get to the next topic about taxes and raising revenue. But one more quick question before we leave healthcare. I'd like each of you to talk about, as specifically, excuse me, as you possibly can, how you would work with the county, especially to provide a comprehensive approach to other public health problems, like the opioid crisis or the need for mental health services. Mr. Johnson, why don't you start with that one?
Well, it's going to be great working with President Preckwinkle. There'll be 2 Chicago public school teachers in charge of the entire region, and that's going to be history. The relationships that I have on the county board, I'm eager and looking forward to the collaboration because there's already an appetite for it. And so, as I said before, whether it's our mental health centers, whether it's expanding our public health care centers, you know, under my first term, we opened up a brand new health care clinic in the 1st District. There's one just to the north of me. And so having someone like President Preckwinkle, I'm appreciative to have her support and her endorsement, who actually believes in public health. It's going to make the pathway far more palatable. What we also have to do is recognize that when it comes to county care in particular, which we've expanded under my time as a Cook County Commissioner, 40,000 additional families have access to county care as it relates to the equity plan that was developed out of the budget for Black Lives that I was the chief sponsor of. There's also an opportunity here for workforce development. And I'm mentioning that because actually one of the greatest predictors of the outcome of a student in the Chicago Public Schools, it's having W-2s. That is the greatest predictor. It's not just about childcare. It's about having economic stability, and too often, healthcare and W-2s have been synonymous. And that's why expanding county care and working with county government to do that, along with creating more workforce development opportunities so that people who have been suffering in abject poverty for too long have the ability to actually raise their family. It has to be comprehensive. It has to work hand in hand. And so yes, county care, yes, making sure that we're doing everything in our power to continue to work with the county government to expand health care.
Mr. Vallas.
Yeah. I've always had great success working with both the county government and the state, or for that matter, the federal government. In New Orleans, I negotiated the largest FEMA settlement with the much maligned Bush administration and to rebuild the entire school system at $1.9 billion. So I have always had a history of working with governments, state governments, federal governments, other local governments, because obviously, you know, we are in a region, and obviously we have critical issues that we're going to need regional solutions for, like transportation, which I'm sure is a topic we'll get to. So at the end of the day, working in collaboration is critically important. But I've also recognized that you've got to control your own destiny. And the rebuilding of a social service infrastructure is absolutely critical. I mean, it's the core to rebuilding the local economy. And that means reopening the mental health centers, and that means reopening opioid and drug addiction centers. And I lost my youngest son to chronic drug addictions. So we're personally impacted by that, and we continue to be personally impacted by that. But that also includes crisis intervention centers. That also includes family counseling centers. And you know, if you're billing right, which I think we both agree that the city has been disastrous at, you can secure Medicaid. There are federal funds out there. There are federal funds that are being returned or that were returned just this year because the city did not have a plan to do lead pipe replacements, to get the lead pipes out, to get the lead out of the drinking water. So at the end of the day, if you are opening these centers and you are billing right, whether it's for Medicaid, whether you're tapping into existing state or other federal programs, or for that matter, private insurance company programs, many of these centers will, in effect, pay for themselves. So you need to begin rebuilding a comprehensive social service infrastructure because it's critical to the development and the growth in the community. I know how to do that. I've worked with federal and state agencies and county agencies at all levels, and I'll do that as mayor.
Thank you very much. Now for the segment that you both gentlemen like to talk about a lot is taxes and raising revenue. So let's begin there. You both stated on the Alliance survey that you'd identify and implement equitable ways to increase revenue for Chicago without raising property taxes on homeowners or applying what many consider inequitable fines and fees. So let me hear your plan for raising revenue for Chicago. Mr. Johnson, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's appropriate that I go first because I was the first one to actually release a budget plan. In fact, I'm the only one to release a budget plan. Because you can't do any of the things that we're discussing without a real comprehensive approach of how we are going to eliminate the structural deficit, raise critical revenue to make the investments that are needed for a sustainable economy, and doing it without raising property taxes. This is not about a cap. This is about not raising them. I've passed multi-billion-dollar budgets, implemented multi-billion-dollar budgets at the county level, making those critical investments without raising property taxes. It can be done. Look, I've put forth solutions because I believe it's important that we close the gap between government and those who rely upon it, which are the residents and the taxpayers. And so I put forth the budget plan so we can debate it now because I'm going to tell you the truth. The fact of the matter is we had a dedicated revenue stream to secure the retirement of people, of which most of the individuals whose retirement will be secure through a dedicated revenue are women. The average take-home for retirement was $35,000 to $40,000 a year. When that dedicated revenue stream was removed, we were on the hook for a $2.5 billion tax bill. And so that's why, look, if there are revenue ideas that the public does not want, then we get to negotiate that together. But this is not about just simply no. This is about getting to a yes. We all agree in here that we have to make more investments. We also agree that you can't keep balancing the budget off of the backs of working people. So since we agree with that, you agree with my budget plan. Help me find $250 million, you all, annually. A $16.7 billion budget, and we can't find $200 million? Natural growth over the course of any budget, you can find 5% of revenue increase. The plan is available for us to actually have the debate. I'm always going to tell you the truth.
Mr. Vallas.
Okay, well, you know, let me tell you the truth about that plan. City income tax or tax on or a tax on people coming in from the suburbs, first of all, you would have to get state authorization for that. A head tax, really? A head tax? Think about that. Think about that means when you hire more people, you pay more you pay taxes on the person you hire. A hotel motel tax, 66% increase. We already have the highest hotel motel tax. And what's the vacancy rate in the hotel motel industry? It's abysmally low. And then we can go on and on and on. So it's not a realistic list of tax increases. The budget that the mayor controls is not $16 billion. It is $28 billion. It includes the CHA, the CTA, the schools, the parks, you name it. And you've got to be able to manage a budget and oversee a budget and evaluate a budget that includes all the spending that the mayor has control over. In addition, there is $1.1 billion and rising in property taxes that are diverted to the tax increment financing program. We all know that. That also offers avenues of accountability. And just look at the waste in government. Look at the privatization of the Chicago Public Schools, the Aramark, the Sodexo contracts, the hundreds of millions of dollars that they're spending there, or the fact that we have many agencies that are top-heavy. Even the police department could reprogram some of the resources that are being spent at the exempt ranks and in the management level down to hiring police officers so we can have police officers responding to 911 calls in 3 minutes rather than 3 hours. So I've managed multi-billion-dollar budgets. I've balanced multi-billion-dollar budgets without raising property taxes. You know, I'm going to try to avoid, I'm not going to raise property taxes, and I will try to avoid other taxes and fees, you know, at least until I've gone through the process of assessing the $28 billion in spending that the mayor has under her control.
Let's follow up on that thought, Mr. Vallas. Privatization. Some city services, property, water, social services, parks, infrastructure, a lot of privatization of those areas is accelerating. What is your general position on privatization, and is there any asset that you would protect at any cost from privatization?
Well, I don't think the privatization at the city level has worked. And let me point out that the Sodexo and Aramark contracts were Rahm Emanuel's privatization. I think I was in New Orleans when he was doing that, rebuilding schools. So at the end of the day, you know, I think the city's privatization efforts have really been kind of an abysmal failure. Even this effort to privatize the mental health services by hiring entities to do like citywide mental health centers, services, while avoiding opening community-based and community-run mental health centers. So I think privatization has been extremely inefficient. And I'll give you one example where I think privatization has really been a failure, was in streets and sanitation. I support a return to the old ward superintendent system. The grid system and the privatization at streets and sanitation has been disastrous. You know, so at the end of the day, I think privatization has resulted in reduced services, in more expensive services, but it's also done something else. It's decimated the pensions, because when you have 10, 15, 20% fewer employees paying into the pension system, it only aggravates the pension crisis. And remember, new employees who come into the system are Tier 2 employees. So you return to the grid system, you begin to deprivatize what's been done in streets and sanitation and others, and you fill the police vacancies in the police ranks, and you will actually significantly improve the health of the pension funds, because the individuals who will be hiring will be in the Tier 2 system. So at the end of the day, I think privatization has been misguided, and in some cases, it's really been a disaster for the city.
Mr. Johnson, your general position on privatization and any area that you would set aside and protect from privatization at all cost?
Yeah, all that which is for the public good, I will protect, because it is a public good. Look, absolutely, I'm opposed to privatization. I'm sorry, I'm just struck right now just because, you know, 2/3 of the schools in New Orleans have been privatized. You were there. You actually did that.
Please.
You know, and in Philadelphia, where privatization run amok as well, the mayor of Philadelphia said that he has never seen $1 that Paul Vallas wasn't willing to spend 3 different times. That's not counting. That's manipulating. We can't do that, y'all. We just can't. When I'm talking about telling people the truth, I tell you what my positions are. I believe in those positions. I live by them. I don't change position because it is now more politically expedient to say that. The fact of the matter is, when you ran for mayor the last time, you said that you were going to raise property taxes by $250 million. You came in 9th place. You did not say that this time. I understand why you wouldn't say it. That's why your website only has 3 sentences when it comes to the budget. Privatization has been one of the greatest failures when it comes to the employment of women. And not to mention, as we talk about retirement security, you stop paying into retirement security. It's why we have a $2.5 billion tax bill. It's why I'm committed to eliminating the structural deficit that was caused in the 90s when I was in high school, making the critical investments Of the $16.7 billion, I can count there are other sister agencies. I know collectively, I'm talking about the city budget though. While making those investments without raising property taxes, that's my plan. I will always tell you the truth.
Mr. Vallas, would you like 30 seconds to rebut?
Yeah, certainly. All the schools in New Orleans are public schools. They're public, not-for-profit schools. When Moon Landrieu and Mitch Landrieu and Senior Senator Landrieu brought me down to the local school system, the one thing that we were mandated to do was to create a system of independent schools because the district had not opened their schools for a year because of the level of corruption. So all the schools are community schools. Those are schools that are not-for-profit local schools. So those are the facts. And incidentally, the test scores rose for 7 consecutive years in a district that was the second poorest performing.
Thank you very much. Just a note to the audience, in about 20 minutes or so, we'll be asking some of your questions. So wanted to give the folks who are rounding up questions that heads up. But you know, one of the latest efforts to raise money to fight homelessness in the city is the Bring Chicago Home proposal that calls for increasing the real estate transfer tax, so we're talking about taxes, on properties over $1 million in order to provide a permanent revenue stream for affordable housing. Is that the right way or the wrong way to address the problem? Mr. Johnson, let's begin with you.
It's the right way. I mean, I support Bring Chicago Home, raising the real estate transfer tax to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to address our unhoused crises. We can't keep calling ourselves a world-class city when you have 65,623 people who are unhoused, of which 20,000 of them are students. You know, look, and many of the individuals who are unhoused are individuals who were formerly incarcerated. Many of them have addiction. I've had a brother, I've shared this story, who had untreated trauma and died addicted and unhoused. You have to love people. You really do. And what Bring Chicago Home does, it demonstrates that our heart will be where our treasure is. That's the only scripture you're going to get from this PK today, I promise. But look, I've looked into the faces of young people who come to school every single day and they don't have anywhere to lay their head or they're doubled up. It's why I passed the Just Housing amendment that eliminated discrimination for those who were formerly incarcerated to be able to access homes. I passed that. I did it because it has to be comprehensive. Public transportation, good schools, access to job training so that we're not just housing individuals, we're providing an entire economy around them. We spend $2.5 billion to build a brand new neighborhood. $2.5 billion. And we can't not make sure that every single family has someone to lay their head? I think we can. You just have to have someone who is willing to tell you the truth, how we're going to pay for it, and what it's going to go towards. We're going to raise the revenue to make sure that no one is too poor to live in one of the richest cities in one of the wealthiest countries at the richest time in the history of the world. Under my administration, we love people, we invest in people.
Mr. Vallas, the Bring Chicago Home proposal, right or wrong with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me talk about what I've been talking about for the better part of 4 years on how to address the fundamental comprehensive affordable housing issue. First of all, you need to get tax increment financing revenues into the game. Because let me give you an example. 2 downtown TIFs expired. They generated $120 million in revenue. What if that money had been dedicated to affordable housing? That, incidentally, would provide almost an equal amount of the new tax, only the latest tax that my opponent has proposed. So at the end of the day, why are we expending $1.1 billion and rising in new tax increment financing revenues in ways that does not benefit the neediest communities, and it is not funding things like affordable housing? Why aren't we removing the obstacles to conversion of unimproved space to garden units? You could create well over 100,000 units within a year or 2 years, because there are so many obstacles for apartment owners to convert their unimproved space. What if we went out there and reclaimed the thousands and thousands of vacant residential units out there through land banking, through tax seizures, or through taking buildings that have been seized because of unpaid taxes, or for that matter, through scavenger sales or through eminent domain, and turn those buildings, those thousands of buildings, I think there's something like 15,000 buildings, over to community-based organizations so that they could provide housing for returning citizens, for victims of domestic violence, just not in addition to people who are in need of affordable housing. And finally, what I talked about now and what I talked about 4 years ago was capping individual property taxes. Because the mayor, right, the mayor said she froze property taxes this year. Anyone's property taxes not go up this year? We had a property tax freeze. Yet people are reeling because in gentrified areas, it doesn't matter if you freeze property taxes. Your property taxes are going to climb. If your property values are growing, you're going to pay more. So at the end of the day, individual property taxes is what keeps you from paying draconian property tax costs.
One final question before we move off the subject of raising revenue. At least two of your answers today, Mr. Johnson, have said we're going to get money from the state or we will get more money from the state for various programs. A, what are you going to do if the money from the state doesn't come through? And how are you going to get the business community on your side?
Mm-hmm. Look, the education of Chicago is the business of Chicago. I don't know any businesses who do not want to see an educated workforce. So we're already on the same side, right? I'm bringing people together. Everybody agrees on that, right? As far as the state of Illinois, I have relationships there, right? It's going to take us some time. But having relationships with the Senate President, with the Speaker of the House, other elected officials, to help us get the type of resources that are needed for the city of Chicago is to the advantage of the entire state of Illinois. No one wants to see the city of Chicago fail. But you have to have relationships. You have to have a Democrat that's willing to work with Democrats. It's going to be harder for Paul. Just will be. I mean, not that we don't work with Republicans. You get my point, though, right? And so it's why I fought hard collectively with individuals who are fighting for a progressive income tax. 71% of the city of Chicago said that we have to have a progressive and a fair tax structure. We already agree. And so we get to take another shot at it, y'all. We do. Here's the difference, though. You're going to have a mayor, unlike the outgoing administration, who actually agrees with the rest of the city of Chicago. But we also look into budget and we find some efficiencies without having to lay people off, right? Because you can't have that. But it really is going to require collective responsibility. You have to have someone who's willing to champion the issues. Like coming from a working class family, it ain't hard to stand up for working class people. It's not. And so I'm committed to building those relationships and working with the county government, with the state government, with the federal government. If you look at my endorsements and my support, it has the most diversified set of endorsements. People are ready. People tried to make me out to be like this scary radical person because I love people. Investing in people is the most radical thing we can do, and working with the General Assembly is what I'm committed to.
Time.
Thank you.
Mr. Vallas, you are viewed by many as the more pro-business candidate. Can the people of the city of Chicago trust you to say no to them when needed?
Well, look, at the end of the day, you have to build broad coalitions. And, it's funny because most of the individuals who are contributing to me have actually contributed to past mayors. Really. I mean, Brandon is overwhelmingly financed and supported by the Chicago Teachers Union. He's still on the Chicago Teachers Union payroll as a consultant. So at the end, no one's beholden to me. But if I'm able to go to Springfield with broad support within the business community, then anything's possible. So, I take pride in the fact that I was able to negotiate with both Republican and Democrat administrations. The Clinton administration provided us with money. My deputy chief of staff was President Obama's education secretary. That worked to my benefit. I was able to secure the largest FEMA settlement in history with the much maligned George Bush administration, $1.9 billion. It's not a child in a school in New Orleans, or for that matter, that is either not completely new or completely rebuilt schools. You have to do three things that the mayor currently is not doing. I think we can all agree. Number one, you have to have a plan for getting that money. I mean, they just returned back to the state hundreds of millions of dollars in money for lead pipe replacements because they didn't have their plan implemented. Hopefully they'll be able to reclaim it. Secondly, you've got to tackle the reimbursement issue. Medicaid, there are reimbursements that the city is squandering. Do you know that the mental health facilities, just like the EMS services, putting more ambulances into the pipeline, they'll pay for themselves if they're billing properly. So you need an administration that knows how to bill. And then thirdly, you need a mayor who's going to recognize that you need the support of the business community and you need the support of other mayors in the region if you are going to go forward with a state agenda or even a federal agenda that's going to be effective. That is what I've always been able to do. I've always been able to have success through coalition building.
Thank you so much. You both have talked a bit about your political endorsements and supports. So, Mr. Johnson, let's begin with you. You have been a teacher endorsed by the Chicago Teachers Union, have received major financial support. Convince voters that you would not be beholden to the union and their positions when it comes to education, policy, and practice.
Look, I'm going to be the mayor of the city of Chicago for everyone. I've demonstrated that as a Cook County commissioner, even supported by allies that I've had to have hard conversations with. Like I can continue to demonstrate my independence by articulating what I've actually done as a Cook County commissioner. And there were tough conversations that I had to have with a variety of allies who supported me. You know, whether they were part of community-based organizations or the larger political movement that has propelled us into the progressive state that we're in right now. But look, the bottom line is I'm also supported by child care workers. And I want you all to hear me, because child care workers and home care workers are overwhelmingly black and brown women and immigrant women. Do not dismiss them. Do not further to invisibilize them. Every time we talk about my support, from teachers to teachers' assistants to crossing guards, make sure we're telling the full story. I'm supported by a number of people across this city. Y'all, I was polling at 2.3% in October. And here I am. You don't get to this point if you're only supported by teachers, assistants, and crossing guards. But it's the working people throughout the city of Chicago that know that they will not just have a seat at the table, they get to actually set the menu. Because for too long, corporations and millionaires and billionaires have had unfettered access to the fifth floor. Don't dismiss the fact that we have over 5,000 individual donors, over 1,000 volunteers who are part of this infrastructure, you all. We are getting support from all over the country because the country recognized electing a progressive to the fifth floor in the city of Chicago who is tethered to working people is transformational for the country. We get to make history, and I do not apologize for being supported by the working people of the city of Chicago, because that's what makes this Chicago great. This is how we're actually going to transform this city. Our promises get to be as big as the city of Chicago.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Vallas, you've been endorsed and worked for the Fraternal Order of the Police. The bulk of your campaign money comes from about 30 people. If building trust is key to community and police relations, how can you assure residents that your ties to the FOP won't compromise your policies and practices?
Well, let me just say this. I actually was invited to come in and to help negotiate with the FOP as well as with the city, and invited by the city's chief negotiator, who had negotiated all my collective bargaining agreements with the teachers union and the police when I was city budget director. And I said I would do it on two conditions. Number one, you had to, the FOP had to accept all the accountability provisions that the advocates had demanded, particularly the accountability provisions in the sergeant's contract. And number two, you could not pay me. I never got paid for the FOP. They donated the money to a children's charity. And I never took any FOP money, nor the sergeant's money. Now, I'm going to welcome the support of all the other labor unions that have been announcing endorsements every single day for the last 3 or 4 days, and a number of others who are going to endorse me next week. But at the end of the day, I said I was here to resolve the issue of negotiating a long-term collective bargaining agreement because there were 2,500 police officers eligible and preparing for retirement who would have left had they waited a fifth year for their pay raise and their back pay. So quite frankly, I kind of think I did the mayor a favor on that one. At the end of the day, you don't go to the places that I have gone to if you're bought and sold. You don't go to Haiti 40 times and continue to be involved in Haiti since the earthquake in 2010, if you are bought and sold by anyone. You know, I joke that I'll probably be term limited by age, but at the end of the day, I have always done what is right, and I've always responded to every need, every person in need, any institution in crisis who has invited me to come and help them. I have stepped up to the plate, regardless of the personal sacrifices. So I have not reached this stage in my public service career where I'm going to be beholden or responsive to any special interest.
Thank you very much.
Those two questions were actually some of the questions we got from the audience as well. And great minds think alike. One of the original closing questions Cheryl and I talked about, but we later changed, is a question you guys have asked, so we get to ask it anyway. The city of Chicago has been called a lot of nasty things. People talk about the reputation of Chicago and that it's tarnished. If you are mayor of the city of Chicago and you are in the elevator with somebody, you have 2 minutes to sell the city of Chicago as a place for them to live and work, what do you say? Brandon Johnson, we're going to start with you.
Well, look, I mean, we're here today because we love the city of Chicago and we love the people of the city of Chicago. I want you to know, if I look tired to you all, it's because I am a little sleepy, but I'm having the time of my life. I've had the unique opportunity to travel all over the city of Chicago. Our thriving economic corridors with our small businesses who want more investment, micro grants to expand their businesses, other individuals who want to imbibe the entrepreneur spirit that our ancestors lived off of. They want those type of investments. I've seen it work. When I drive around the city of Chicago and you see what neighborhood schools and neighborhood high schools can look like everywhere in the city, right? We have some of the best high schools in the entire country, right? And they're not all selective enrollment, right? We have some of the greatest sports facilities. I'm asking the McCaskies to hold on a couple of months. I have an idea. I actually have a plan, right? But we also have access to transportation, right? I mean, between our major airports and the fact that we have runways and economic corridors throughout the entire city, whether it's Chicago Avenue or Cottage Grove or Stony Island, Jefferson Park to Morgan Park, the people, the restaurants, the hope and the promises, the housing. You know, the fact that we do have some vacancy downtown, but this is an opportunity to bring in logistics and biotech and life sciences, the type of economic drivers that can revolutionize our economy. Look, the best thing about the city of Chicago is that we actually have an opportunity to actually have World Series in the city of Chicago again, right? Our arts and our culture, the makeup of our people, there are so many things to be proud of, but you need political leadership who's willing to invest and expand. Whether you're a small business, a big corporation, or a child care worker, there's room for you in the city of Chicago, and we welcome everyone.
Nice elevator pitch, Mr. Vallas.
Yeah, you know, look, as we sat down together tonight, we kind of leaned over and we said, we got to get our teams together just in case. Because we're the last candidate standing, and at the end of the day, we're both running because we love this city. We love the city. That's why we're running. We recognize its great diversity, its great history, its great institutions. I mean, we are poised for climate change. We're like the Saudi Arabia of fresh water. I mean, think about that. I mean, really, if we only used our water resources right. So at the end of the day, this is a great city, but, you know, the mayor sets the tone. The mayor sets the tone. If you're going to be inclusive, if you're going to be welcoming, if you're going to tone down the rhetoric, if you're going to avoid, literally inviting people to attack you, you know, sometimes, you know, if you just be a little low-key, a little more low-key. I mean, at the end of the day, there are so many things that we can do in the mayor's office that can really kind of change the perception literally overnight. So look, this is the greatest city in the world. It simply has been lacking. It has been lacking when it comes to quality leadership, and quality decision making on the 5th floor. And it didn't begin with Lori Lightfoot, who I supported, but certainly, obviously, things have struggled. Things have gotten worse. But it begins with the image and the tone that is set in the mayor's office. And I look forward, to working with Brandon, whether it's as mayor, having to negotiate with the Chicago Teachers Union, or it's whether helping him on the things that I've thought through and the kind of transition thinking that I've had. Not that I'm getting way ahead of the game, but, what do we have, a 5-week period after this election to gear up? And we've got so many problems facing us because we are in this together at the end of the day. We love this city. We want to make this city work because we just don't want to make the city that works in the traditional sense, but the city that works in the new sense, and that's the city that works for everyone.
Thank you so much. A question from the audience. The judgment fund for payments of settlements and judgments resulting from police misconduct cases has nearly reached $1 billion over the last 15 years, and at least $50 million a year lately. Those numbers will be fact checked. But what would you do to address this? Mr. Vallas, why don't we begin?
Well, I think there's been about $1 billion paid out, and what people don't realize is there's been about $350 million paid out that are unrelated to police. So what that means is that means that the city is not doing the type of risk management that is needed to be done. 4 years ago, all the candidates talked about creating a risk management unit. So when there is something, when there's a lawsuit that you lose, when there's a lawsuit that's brought against you, you assess and you evaluate and you make adjustments. And that's really never happened. So what happens is you keep on doing the same old, and you're not responding to it. You're not learning from it. So what we have to do is every lawsuit should be a learning experience. When you pay off when you have to do a payout for a tragic incident, or for that matter, a tragic accident, because we're paying tons of money out on a yearly basis for accidents that have occurred, you've got to kind of assess and evaluate the risks involved, and you have to make adjustments. So the law department has got to be empowered to do that. And let me tell you, if you fully implement the consent decree and you create the type of internal management structure, we have police officers being supervised by sergeants, not 1 in 30 or 1 in 50 or 1 in 100, but 1 in 10. And those sergeants are selected and they're trained. And you have training officers that are monitoring and working with young police officers because the police department's getting increasingly younger. And if you have the right supervision and control, then you're not going to have these repeated offenses. You're not going to have the same mistakes being made again and again. And I think it's incumbent. You're never going to eliminate them altogether, but at the end of the day, there's no reason why we should be paying this much out. We've got to implement and fully implement the consent decree, and those settlements will go down.
Mr. Johnson, your response about settlements.
Yeah, this is a real, this is a harsh reality that we have to confront as a city. Look, there have been over 100 black men, who have been exonerated because they were wrongfully convicted, right? Charged, right? And this is why I'm supportive of reparations for those who were tortured. These are overwhelmingly made black men. There is a real strain in the city of Chicago. We have to confront it. And you have to tell the truth about history as well. As a social studies teacher, is why I believe in teaching history, all of it. Because if we don't know how it happened, we're doomed to repeat it. And, the consent decree, I mentioned this earlier. One of the baselines is research, so that we can actually come together and develop policy to actually help transform this structure. But we also have to make sure that we're not putting police officers in positions that they should not be in. They're responding to mental health crises. The Los Angeles Times just released a story. The Los Angeles Police Department actually agrees with me. You read the article, it says that you can't keep asking police officers to do their job and someone else's. They believe in passing treatment, not trauma. Now, I can't be the mayor for every single city, but as the mayor of the city of Chicago, I'm going to make sure that we are passing policy and laws that remove the harsh interactions between law enforcement and everyday people. You know, the last thing is this, that we have to make sure that we're actually enforcing the laws that are on the books, right? Like our red flag laws. You know, this is why I believe in community control, where we can make decisions about whether or not police officers should be in school buildings. These are all dynamics that I'm committed to doing as mayor of the city of Chicago.
Okay, this question from the audience, I'm going to take the liberty of expanding it a little bit. Because while you two were the top 2 vote getters February 28th, neither of you won any of the black wards. The question from the audience is, what are you going to do to reach Latinx voters? I would add, and African American voters as well. Mr. Vallas, you want to start with that?
Well, by advocating for issues and offering solutions to the crises that all the communities are facing. Obviously, public safety is an issue everywhere, everywhere. And we're not just talking about ensuring that you have beat integrity, that you have officers who are known and are known, who know the community and are known by the community, and whether they're responding to the 911 calls on their local police beat, or whether they're walking the CTA platform or they're at the CTA stations. We not only need a presence in the community of police officers that the community is familiar with, properly supervised, but we also need to make sure that the police are enforcing the law constitutionally. I mean, that's a big issue. That's an issue that has to be addressed. Public safety is a human right, and every community is concerned about the issue of public safety, safe streets, safe communities. Second is quality schools. We've all got to work to strengthen our local public schools. No one should ever be confined or limited to a failing or unperforming school. No one should ever have their options limited. And the way to improve those options is, in effect, by bringing magnet-type programs to neighborhood schools, so that neighborhood school is offering the type of programs that so many parents seek other educational services to provide. And then the third issue is real equity. When you're spending $28 billion a year and you're raising taxes every year, and you're not really providing sustainable investment in long underserved and disinvested communities, I mean, clearly this is an issue of concern throughout the city. It's not a redistribution of a wealth issue as much as it is an expansion and a reactivation of existing wealth that occurs in the communities. How many times do we begin developing communities, but because of gentrification, we're driving people who were in the communities, those very same communities, and should be the beneficiaries of that investment, out of the community. So it's the common issues that are going to unite us.
Thank you, Mr. Vallas. Mr. Johnson.
Well, I'm grateful to have a movement that has surrounded me in this moment. It's multicultural, it's multi-generational. As an organizer, I'm going to go to every single community and make the case. Look, this is not about options, this is about guarantees. Too long in the city of Chicago, we've left it to chance. That's when you're sitting on the L platform, it shouldn't be a chance that the train is coming, it should be a guarantee. There shouldn't be a chance to a fully funded neighborhood school, it should be a guarantee. What if we left it to chance to have access to health care? Anybody got asthma in here? I have asthma. What if we left it to chance that you could breathe? That's not a society that we can be proud of. And so, yes, I'm going into every single community. That's why I'm making sure that we're not going to raise property taxes. The Latinx community has been hit hard. Communities are being gentrified in the southwest side of the city of Chicago because of property taxes. When we talk about, black neighborhoods in particular, where we are spending more to incarcerate black people than we are to educate them. I'm always going to keep it 100. That's how we're going to win the vote in the city of Chicago, because you're going to have someone who tells the truth. And the truth of the matter is that we've had politics that have failed us for too long, an entire generation. I don't think it's a coincidence that Election Day is April 4th, the day that we will commemorate the life and the legacy of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who died fighting for the very working people who support me. In fact, it was Dr. King that said, if we figured it out in Chicago, we can do it anywhere else in the world. He said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential it would have. I'm glad Reverend Jesse Jackson is voting for me. I'm glad to have the support of his son, Jonathan Jackson, but I'm also glad to have the support of Jan Schakowsky. Even Elizabeth Warren in Boston, Massachusetts is saying, yo, you need a better, stronger, safer Chicago, and Brandon's the dude. And so that's how we're going to win the vote in the city of Chicago, because I'm the dude.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. A question from the audience. Do you have plans to modernize our building and zoning codes to address climate change, such as promoting and allowing indoor farming, for instance? Mr. Vallas, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, the next time we enact a climate change plan, let's not change it 2 years later. I mean, how many climate change plans have we had? 4? I mean, every mayor comes out with a new climate change plans, and some come out with 2. You know, so at the end of the day, we have to have a plan. We have to have a plan, and that plan needs to be implemented. But what we have to be prepared to do is, when we are asking businesses to convert, when we are asking new businesses to make adjustments, we are asking homeowners to, or apartment owners to convert from gas to, you know, and to move away from fossil fuels. We've got to find a way to incentivize them, because we are constantly imposing incentives on everyone. I mean, look at the burden that we're putting on homeowners to pay for the replacement of their lead pipes. I mean, we should be prepared to do that, and there's a lot of ways to do it. There's ways to do it by taking advantage of future TIF revenues and bonding off those future TIF revenues now that will be freed up when the TIFs expire, so we can have monies that we can invest in infrastructure improvements, money that we can invest in financing the type of climate change infrastructure changes that are critically important. There's ways to incentivize new businesses, or for that matter, new homeowners, or for example, existing businesses or existing homeowners to do the necessary conversions by maybe providing them a property tax credit, or providing them a property tax abatement, or freezing their property taxes for 4 or 5 years. I mean, the state revenue code is littered with special exemptions and special homestead exemptions for this and that. We are a home rule unit, meaning we have maximum latitude to offer the type of incentives that that would be needed and that would be extremely helpful. So instead of people resisting climate change because marginal businesses sometimes cannot survive, new mandates that are imposed, or for that matter, homeowners, we can actually provide them the financial assistance to do that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to combine a couple of the audience questions into one.
Wait, we have to answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, jumping ahead.
I apologize.
No, it's
my problem.
No, it's all good. You're good.
I know you will forgive me.
So yes, I do support all of the creative measures that have been proposed to bring, you know, more green technology, including urban farms, into our spaces, indoor and outdoor. You know, look, there's real food apartheid that exists in the city of Chicago and really throughout the globe. And this is an incredible opportunity for us to grow our economy. As I said before, I hated the fact that we had to go on a hunger strike to have a school remain open, Diet High School, that was speaking to this dynamic. But I'm glad that we prevailed. Our education system has to make a commitment, and I will ensure that this happens, that we are creating the workforce that is prepared to inherit the type of biotech jobs, the life science jobs, with all of the vacancy that exists in the city of Chicago that can attract these businesses. Logistics, manufacturing, digital, as we move towards more of a digital dynamic to create many of the type of equipment that we're gonna need to be able to right size, but also retrofit our buildings. Like, we're talking about trillions of dollars that will be made available through the federal government to expand these opportunities. You have to have someone who is prepared to lead. It's why within my first 100 days of my administration, I'm gonna pass a cumulative impact study so that we can have a full assessment of the environmental needs that we have. Now, look, You're not going to have to sue my administration like this one when a toxic waste dump was being pushed on the southeast side of the city of Chicago, and I'm glad to be part of that movement as well. And so environmental justice that includes making sure that we're providing food, a basic human right and a need, through the modernization of our entire society that also creates job opportunities. And so, yes, I'm committed to that type of innovation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Now, I'm going to take a couple of questions and put them together. There were questions about the CTA. Chicago writer Mary Wisniewski in the last year posted that while she has always used the CTA, takes it everywhere, that she was no longer going to be taking the CTA at night because she no longer felt safe. The question from the audience is, how are you going to make the CTA safe? And also, when was the last time you took public transportation? Mr. Johnson, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I typically ride public transportation 3 to 4 times a month during board week. Board week is next week. I will be on the train all week. Now, to be honest, life is a little bit different being driven around the city of Chicago, and I don't want y'all to think that the brother got extra because he's got a driver. That's just so that I'm on time, all right? But it is unreliable and it is unsafe, and one of the things that we can do right away is to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make it more reliable and more safe. And one of the things that we can do is to move our buses a lot faster. So I'm going to expand bus-only lanes, and we're also going to give traffic preferences to buses so that they can move a lot quicker, right? The other thing that we can do is, particularly the green line, which is the most inequitable line, is having full accessibility. That's why I'm a proponent and I'm supportive of plowing the sidewalks, also modernizing our transportation system to make it more accessible for individuals with disabilities. I'm also committed to making sure that we increase ridership by making it free for Chicago public school students. Until we have fully funded neighborhood schools, children have to disperse throughout the entire city of Chicago to go to a school that's outside of their communities. We shouldn't have to pay. Seniors ride free. Individuals with low income, particularly working people, will have free or discounted rates. The other thing that we can do is to make sure that there are actual more adults who are available on our platforms. And we've talked about the ambassador program, but it's also about making sure that we're moving people along, individuals with disabilities, to have access as they get to the platform. Bottom line is this, as I said before, investment, investment, and investment. You can't have any of these services. You cannot have a reliable transportation system and a safe system without actually having a workforce. That's why, again, our public school system has to move with the expediency to help young people get in a pathway to CDLs. These are the things that we would do within the first 100. Some of those things we'll do within the first 100 days, but these are also long-term solutions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Vallas.
CTA ridership is down 500,000 a day. Only 18% of the operating budget comes from the fare box. WBZ reported that half the riders feel that the CTA is unsafe. I've met with all the transit unions, and they have told me their number one priority is public safety. Trains are late because they don't have enough employees. Why? Employees are leaving, and they can't recruit employees because they are afraid. Do I believe in improved efficiency, improved management? Do I believe that we should have ambassadors and social workers working with individuals who are on the train and obviously are in need of all sorts of social services? Absolutely. You don't want the police to do that. But make no bones about it. When you go to New York City, you can't go anywhere in the transit system without seeing 2 police officers, whether it's on the platform, whether it's riding the trains. Public safety is number one, because when the COVID money runs out, the district is going to go bankrupt. The biggest, most immediate emergency that we're going to be facing, as part of the public safety matrix, is the financial viability of the CTA, because the CTA cannot survive when 18% of its revenue is coming from the fare box. That's a disaster. So what would I do? First of all, I would get rid of all the private security. They don't arrest, they're walking around, they run away. You've seen it over and over again. Because for $100 million, you can hire 300 police officers specifically selected to provide transit security on top of the alleged 200 officers that you have there. Public safety is job one on the CTA. My pledge is to make the CTA as safe as going to the airport.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you to our audience for the questions that you've presented for our candidates. So a closing question for you gentlemen. This month is Women's History Month, a time when we officially recognize and celebrate the contributions that women have made over the course of history in the United States. So, as we bring this forum to a close, I want you to take a few minutes to tell us about a woman in your life who has inspired you and helped influence you in your quest to lead the country's third largest city. Mr. Johnson, since you were smiling so broadly, I'm going to go with you first.
Because, you know, for a married man, it always comes down between your wife and your mother. So I'm just trying to think here, look at the audience. What do I do here? This is like the future of my marriage or my political candidacy. I love you, honey. I'm going to go with my mother. So, look, my mother is, she's an ancestor now. She had a rare heart disease. And when my father, who is a member of the AFSCME union, lost his job, we lost our health insurance. It's why I fought hard to expand health care. It's why I believe in a single payer system. It's why on the county board, you know, we moved on this equity plan to eliminate up to $1 billion of medical debt, because it wasn't just the loss of our mother that disrupted our family. It was the medical bills that almost crushed us. And, you know, the last time, I'll just make it brief here. The last time I saw my mother alive, she was preparing for church, and I was preparing to leave back to college. And she's an amazing woman, had a 5th grade education, and there was nothing that she couldn't do. She was so talented. She would argue cases in front of judges, helping individuals receive Social Security income. She was just she did it all. And she looked me in the face, and I'm a middle child, so, you know, we're extra emotional. We can cry and laugh in the same sentence. And she looked me in the face. It's like we knew this was the last time we would see each other alive. And she says, "Brandon, I need you to take care of yourself, because you're going to help a lot of people one day." Now, I don't know if she thought I would be running for mayor, because if she did, I wish she would have given her son a heads up. But what it taught me was that providing the type of care to make sure that we are healthy and whole, if we can do that, we can spread that type of love throughout the city of Chicago and around the country. So I love you, Mom.
Mr. Vallas.
I'm going to talk about my mom and my wife really quickly. But, you know, yeah, I have to cover both bases. You know, I grew up as a stutterer and stammerer. I started stuttering in 1st grade, and I stuttered literally into my 40s. In fact, to this day, I will not watch myself giving a speech or respond to questions, because I'm absolutely, I know when I'm stuttering or I need transition words and things like that. And when I was really young, people told my mother that, you know, all sorts of things about me. I never go anywhere. My mom, I struggled as a student. I used to be really frustrated and have temper tantrums. I still do, but they're usually behind closed doors. But my mother never gave up. She absolutely convinced me that my only problem was I didn't work hard enough. And she actually fooled me into believing that for the longest time. And, you know, she's 93 years old, and about 4 months ago, and when my dad, and thank God my parents have had a long life, when my dad got sick and he went to a home hospice, she would not put him into a hospice. She took care of him. Of course, we helped, but she took care of him for 72 years. And about 3-4 months ago, she fell and broke her hip in 3 places. And, of course, we had my first grandchild, and we lost our youngest son, and this really left a hole in our family and a hole in our hearts, and this grandson was a godsend. And when my mother went to the hospital to get her 3 broken place hip and broken shoulder replacements, she said, "Honey, I'm not going anywhere. I have a new great-grandson I want to spend time to, and she's up and about and walking and occasionally using the walker, and it's amazing. You know, but also a shout out to my wife, because I put my wife through a hell of a lot. You know, going to New Orleans, going to Haiti, you know, living apart, doing my thing. And I've lost probably, I would say about 10, oh, sorry about that.
Oh, so you give your wife short
Sharon, I apologize. I ran out of time. But I appreciate it. I appreciate the indulgence.
I want to thank each of you. I want to thank each of the candidates for being with us here today. I want to thank you, our audience, both the audience here in person at the Chicago Temple and those of you at home who are joining us. Remember, the election is less than a month away. It is April 4th.
For the Women Take Action Alliance, we both thank you. Have a great weekend.
Great. All right.
All right. How about that? For our moderators, our candidates, thank you. So, to echo what Joan just said, we are a little less than a month out from the election. You have a decision to make. You have a little bit of time. I urge you, as you're trying to make that decision, to make sure you're watching CAN TV, channels 19, 21, 27, 36, and 42, cantv.org, and the new CAN TV streaming app for unfiltered coverage of our elections. Again, we thank you, and we thank the Chicago Women Take Action Alliance for their great partnership. Have a great rest of the day.
We don't. Excuse me, can we have all of the Alliance member or